Lunch and Learn session of 2022. It's good to be back with you after the holiday break. We have called this session The Key to Parenting Grieving Kids, Self-Compassion. It seems like the right time in the world and the right time of year to offer you something that we know is such a valuable resource practice in living in challenging times, in living through stress, in parenting in general, and then when it comes to parenting grieving kids. Erwin Sandler is someone who has done a lot of research on something he's called resilient parenting in bereavement. And the sort of foundation of how to parent resiliently in grief is this word that's been co-opted by our culture, self-care. So I don't know what you think when you hear self-care. I think it's a well-intentioned pop culture phenomenon now to talk about taking care of ourselves and self-care, like have a bubble bath or get a massage, and all of those things feel so good and they're really wonderful when they're accessible to us. But for lots of reasons, they're not always financially, time-wise, preference. Like there's just partnerships, there's just not always those things available to us. And so I hope one of the things that we do as we talk about self-compassion today is that we place it inside the realm of self-care in a really solid way, because self-compassion is something you can always have access to. It doesn't require money. It doesn't require a ton of time. It doesn't require really even learning new skills. So something I'm hoping that you leave this session with is maybe more curiosity about self-compassion, if it's a new concept to you, if it's a new practice, and if it's something that's been a part of your world for a little bit, maybe there's a more connection to your experience of grief through this conversation. So I hope that um, this session, even if it just allows you a slight shift, really, that's all we're really looking for, just a small change that allows you to show up for yourself, to pay attention to your experience, to pause, and to help you respond to yourself with more warmth and kindness. And one of the things that grieving parents talk a lot about is just that list of shoulds, either that they've handed themselves or that other people keep handing them. And I want you to know before we even set out together in this session, that's not what this is. This is an invitation to begin considering what it might be like for you to pick up a practice like self-compassion and turn it, I guess, towards yourself. That's what self-compassion is. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about it. I hope we're going to demystify it a little bit. I think it's like self-care. It's a word that we're using a lot. What does it really mean? Is it for me? So we'll talk about all of these pieces, but I hope it just helps you be more curious. So here's what we're going to talk about: what self-compassion is and isn't, why it matters, what is valuable about it, why are we offering this as a parent lunch and learn session. So let's talk about its value, and then where do we begin? As I said, this isn't something you have to go read a book on or do a workshop on. This is something you can begin right now where you are in really simple ways that you're already doing these things. So I'm going to talk about those things today. So let's dive in. Before we talk about self-compassion, let's just define compassion for the purpose of our conversation. So there are lots of definitions of compassion out there, and there's maybe some even disagreement, but we're going to keep it simple just for the sake of talking about self-compassion. So we're going to use the definition by Dr. Susan Pollack that says compassion is to see someone, connect with their pain and the difficulty they're having. There is some ideas that float around out there that say this is maybe empathy, and compassion has a bit more of an action feel to it. So if that fits for you, I think that fits for me a lot of times, that compassion maybe is a little bit more action oriented, either towards others or in self-compassion toward myself. But really, we can keep it as simple as this, that we see someone's pain, connect with their pain and the difficulty they're having. As we talk about the how-to of self-compassion and kind of what is it exactly, how do we practice it, we're going to use the work of Dr. Kristin Neff. And so she has this really simple model, I guess, practice, this order that we can kind of hold on to as we think about how to begin bringing this into our lives in a way that's valuable and useful to us. Um, she would just, Kristen Neff would just define compassion, I think, a bit differently than this. She would say it is maybe warmth and understanding when people suffer, fail, or feel inadequate. And so self compassion is really where we take these things and we turn them back toward ourselves, where we offer them to ourselves. And at the start, I said, you don't have to learn a whole bunch of new tools or skills or even spend a ton of time, figuring out how to do this. If you think about it, you already have all the skills for compassion. It's just that we have not often been taught. It's not valued to turn um, those same skills toward ourselves. So self-compassion. So let's define that. And then I love this. If our compassion does not include ourselves, it's incomplete. So I hope to sort of convince you of this by the end, that there is immense value. I think both as a human being in the world, but also as a parent, striving for resilient parenting to raise resilient kids in the face of some really hard stuff. Your kids have experienced grief and loss in a way that a lot of people haven't. A lot of parents talk about how hard it is to include themselves in that circle. I guess that idea of like putting on your own oxygen mask before you put on your kids. And yet I think it's a really beautiful and normal impulse to want to make sure your kids have solid ground. That is something that I see a lot. I want my kids to have solid ground, and now there's a little bit of room for me to process my grief, and that's okay. And I think what I want to offer is that self-compassion is a really powerful, valuable practice as you do that. I want to offer you this structure. I said that we would use Kristen Neff's model. And so as I talk a little bit about what each of these are, I just wanted to give you a way to hold them. These are sort of boxes or containers for all the things I'm about to talk about. So the practice is very simple, and these are maybe kind of fancy words, but we're going to break them down and demystify them. So the first kind of place to begin is often mindful awareness. So we're going to talk about that. The practice of common humanity, talk about that. And then this entering self-kindness, turning the kindness that we would offer a good friend, the care that we would offer a good friend, back toward ourselves. Before I talk a little bit about those, I want to just share with you about the value of it, why it matters, why put some energy this way, why begin to bring this practice into your life. And so that top line there that says self-compassion changes our physiology is really one of the most the coolest parts about self-compassion to me. So we as human beings, our bodies are always reading for us, reading our environment, what's safe, what's not. And our nervous system is responding to keep us safe. So do I stay away? Do I move toward? And our body, not our cognitive sort of thinking part of our brain, that frontal part of our brain, it's not the part that's first assessing. It's kind of a lower, deeper, more automatic part of our brains and our bodies that are responding to cues in our environment for safety, for well-being. And we are living in a modern world. And so the things that trigger that brain, that part of our brain toward a little bit of danger or threats is not the things that it would have been many, many, years ago when we were living in a different kind of a world. A colleague of mine likes to say we have old software, still running in these brains of ours. But another cool part is that even though our brains can get triggered into danger automatically without us even kind of planning for that, we can give our body and our brains cues for safety as well. And self-compassion is one of the ways that we provide ourselves cues toward safety, toward comfort, toward well-being, that actually, if you see my little bullseye looking graph there, so that sympathetic side of our nervous system, it responds automatically for us to try to keep us safe. That other side, that parasympathetic side, that helps bring us into, it used to be called sort of the rest and digest, but where we come back into um, a window of tolerance that brings equilibrium to us, or that fancy word of homeostasis, like the right balance in our bodies for what we need to do. Self-compassion is one of the practices that can actually move us, shift our state, move us into that parasympathetic, that other side that brings us back into equilibrium. So that's kind of what I want to offer you. We won't go into a ton of sort of neuroscience on it, but if this part interests you as it does me, I encourage you to do some Googling. Kristin Neff has some really cool work out there. Her research has borne this out, that we can actually change our physiology in stress, and grief is a stressor. It's brought immense stress to your system, and it feels like threat on many, many levels at a part of your body and your brain that really aren't even kind of cognitive. So this is a way we can begin to shift our state. So I just want to offer you that. Talk more about that maybe. Just this, I wanted to offer you this before we move on, because I think we'll talk about shifting our body state and using self-compassion as a valuable practice through this idea of window of tolerance that comes from Dr. Dan Siegel. And he developed this model to talk about what I just spoke about with our nervous system, our autonomic, it's called, but our nervous system that runs automatically for us. And if you see there in the center, it's just that our window of tolerance is this place where we are feeling just right, where we're in our zone, where we feel connected and calm and capable, really. You can see there's some things, our empathy is more available to us. Our reactions are more in line with what's going on. We can stay in the moment without, our minds running, taking us into the past or the future. We can more likely be here now. We feel safe. There's an openness and a curiosity, both to ourselves and our experience and to those around us. You can see how that'd be really helpful as a parent. And then you see the top there, that hyperarousal part. And I spoke about, I think now a lot of us are familiar with that idea of fight, flight, or freeze, that stress response that our body goes to automatically under stress, under what is being read as threat. And stress is read as threat in the body. What the body is producing, the neurochemicals and hormones that the body is producing are there to get that sympathetic, that gas kind of side of our system, to get us to safety, to keep us, to get us back into a zone that has equilibrium, has homeostasis. So our bodies are designed for that. And so one of the ways it does that when it reads threat is it assesses, do I need to go up to hyperarousal? Do I need to, all those things you see there? There might be anger or rage or impulsivity or defensiveness. That's the fight kind of side of things, right? Or the running away, the flight. And you can see there's like a pretty good definition right there below it, but things might feel out of control. You might have huge feelings. They feel really overwhelming and intense. And you might kind of be a fighter, yeller, ready to have an argument, or you might need to get out, run. I've seen a lot of that. And the cool thing about this is we don't really choose this. Our system is choosing it for us based on what it thinks we need right now. That lower window, when we fall outside, right below the window, hypoarousal, when we fall outside our window down, that's more, if we talk about fight, flight, and freeze, that's more the freeze side, where there might be numbness and like complete exhaustion and lethargy. You can see that list there, a feeling of emptiness and disconnection from ourselves and from others. There's also disconnection from others up here, but this is just these can be the kind of markers of that. So we might be feeling zoned out, numb, can feel like things are frozen or time goes missing. None of these are wrong. These are all great resources that our body has to help us in times of overwhelm and stress. But what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to help our bodies respond quickly to shift back into that window of tolerance so that we can respond to ourselves, speaking of self-compassion, and those around us in line with our values. And so I may say that a little bit about that later, but this is one of the things that has really drawn me to the practice of self-compassion that it has helped me and can help us live in line with our values, respond to others how we want, um, how what we truly want, how the kind of parent we want to show up to be, and we aren't always able to. If we're out of our window, we're unlikely showing up inside of our values with other people and for ourselves. So we're going to talk about self-compassion as a practice that moves us back into our window of tolerance. So when I said it changes our physiology, it can actually cue our bodies, that other side of our nervous system, the parasympathetic, where our bodies begin to produce other neurochemicals that bring us back into our window, into equilibrium, into that feeling of calm and connected, the right energy. I prefer that over calm, the right energy for what we need at that time. Okay, connected to grief. Still using Dan Siegel's metaphor of the window of tolerance, I just want to acknowledge that people have not done anything wrong, that when you experience grief and loss, your window shrinks. This is happening for you as a parent, and it's happening for your child, even if a lot of things look the same. Sometimes because of the nature of just the way that young people grieve, they can look like they're in their normal window. Their window hasn't really changed too much, but their bodies are also under stress, and their system has diminished the ability to respond in the way that they normally would, to not have either of these underreact, overreact, fall into fall out of their window has also changed. It's shrunk. It's a little bit easier. You do it a little quicker. So this is normal in grief. Nothing you've done wrong. I love this quote by Kristen Neff that says, speaking of the window of tolerance, we constantly fall out of balance over and over. So that would be us just falling out of our window that comes with being human and living in the world and having stressors and situations we can't control. So she says, we constantly fall out of balance over and over, and it's compassion for our stumblings that restore our equilibrium. Okay, coming back to the structure. Okay, I hope I've sold you on some of the value that could be there, that this is a really simple, actually, way to cue your body towards safety and toward equilibrium and toward being able to be in your window and show up for yourself and in your world and in your life in the way that you would hope to, that you would like to, and in the way that your kids also need you to. So let's talk about these three. But here's what we're kind of holding: mindful awareness, common humanity, self-kindness. And I guess just before I move into all of those, what self-compassion is and isn't, just want to highlight this. If you showed up for this session, you also obviously had some interest in self-compassion. So this might be a skewed perspective, but I would invite you to stop and think. I should have asked you this at the start, but invite you to stop and think, without a filter, what comes up for you when you hear the term self-compassion? What's sort of that automatic, unfiltered thought or sense or feeling around it? For me, an unfiltered thought or belief, bias around self-compassion, in all honesty, comes from, obviously, I've been practicing it for a little bit, and it's something you just keep practicing. We never perfect. For me, when I began, it was like, isn't self-compassion for meditators? Because I think that world of mindfulness and meditation have really highlighted self-compassion as a practice, and it does come from really kind of does initiate in a Buddhist perspective. And so for me, that was another one. It's for Buddhists, it's for meditators. And another one that I had is like, it might be a little wimpy, like just a little too soft. I struggle with things that feel extra gentle, and I'll talk more about that when we get to self-kindness. But those are harder for me, and so I couldn't really see the value at first for myself because of those things. So I want to talk about that. Pay attention to your own, and maybe they'll come up as I share. The one on the right there, what it isn't, these are common biases or thoughts or fears that people have if they begin to move into a self-compassion practice, that it will make them weak, that it will be indulgent, they may become less motivated, lazy, won't work toward goals. If I'm always just telling myself, hey, it's okay, it's okay if you don't want to do that, don't do that. I won't accomplish things, I won't be motivated. And then lastly, that it's selfish, self-centered to focus on ourselves, or that it is like a self-pity practice. And Kristen Neff makes a great argument that it couldn't be further from the truth. And also to this argument that it's weak, she says, self-compassion ain't for sissies. And that has been my experience, that it's been, I've shared with you how it can change our physiology, how it can change how we're able to show up in our life and for other people, for ourselves. But in the beginning, it can feel like gritty. It's a substantial practice. It's not weak in the least. And so you may see that if you've moved into that practice in your life, you already know that. And anyway, we'll move forward and talk a little bit more about that. If that was one of yours, you can tuck it away. What it is, though, is this having our own back. Self-compassion is a way that we can have our own back. And I know for a lot of grievers, there are times where it feels grief is isolating. This is like a universal, almost, maybe that's not fair to say, very, very common experience for grievers. That sense of isolation, um, the sense that other people don't know how to support, don't know what to say, when to show up, when not to. And this is a really powerful way to have our own back. The other thing it can do, as I already shared, is that we give our bodies cues for safety and soothing. So I think I've said a lot about that. And it is a way that we can respond to our own pain and suffering with kindness. One of the things that we often do when we share our emotions or what's going on for us with other people is we share it out in the hopes that other people will be able to acknowledge it, um, honor it, hear it, right? Acknowledge. The practice of self-compassion actually says that's good. We need that as humans. We need relationships and we need to have supportive relationships. But one of the cool parts of self-compassion is that one, if we're not getting that from other people, which sometimes is happening, particularly in those early, it doesn't matter, any kind of anyway, anywhere along the line of grief. It's also responding to our own pain and suffering with kindness. And as I shared, a lot of grievers say can be a painful, tender place when people don't know how to do this for us, especially in grief, no matter where you're at on the grief journey, whether it's a new loss or it's, 10 years down the road. One of the things that we often do when we share what's going on for us or a challenge or difficult emotions with other people is we sort of, they happen inside of us and then we share them out in hopes that people will be able to acknowledge them, support us, validate us sometimes, acknowledge what we're going through. And one of the things I love about self-compassion is that we start with us. We do this for ourselves. So that if you remember, the first place is that mindful awareness. So we become aware of what we're sensing, feeling, knowing. And then we do a practice. That's the self-compassion practice we're going to talk about. And we acknowledge that for ourselves first. We honor it, we validate it, we notice it, we respond to it in ourselves first. It's also okay to offer out, but that's one of the things I love about self-compassion. It can become this very rich inner resource that doesn't rely on other people. Of course, we need relationships, we need other people, but we can begin with the relationship with ourselves first. Remember how I said one of my kind of myths or my stumbling points over self-compassion is that it was like too gentle, a little bit weak. I am a pretty motivated person. And I used to, when I was a girl, I had this teenager, I had this poster, a Nike poster on my wall. And it had, that Nike message of like, just do it. And it was just all about like, never give up, don't succumb to pain, push through. So that has served me really well in my life in lots of areas. And so I think for me, moving into self-compassion, there's a little bit of nervousness about what this would mean for the things I've been able to accomplish with a little bit of that drive. And what I've learned and what Kristen Neff offers us is that There is a way with compassion to continue to hold that part of us that has helped do the motivating and the protecting that we've needed, but it has a different feel to it. So I just want to offer you this. It's kind of a busy slide, but I love it because it's so visual. And so one of the newer parts of Kristen's work is talking about these two sides of compassion, the tender side and the fierce side. So I love the image there. This is, I think the credit is at the bottom, which I can't see on my screen right now, but I wanted to make sure and leave it there. This tender, loving, responsive bear parent, the idea of mama bear, I think we all understand that's this fierce, protective image. And so we have the other side where there is the goal of like tending pain, tending suffering with comfort and soothing, with acceptance. That's that side. And then the fierce side is the taking action side. So I think it has it there. Yeah, this acceptance, this validation. And then the fierce side takes action. And so if you remember when I started defining compassion, I said some people would argue that just noticing is part of empathy, not compassion. But I think Kristen would disagree with that, because she's saying that inside of compassion, or self-compassion in this case, there is room for both of these things in balance. The acceptance, the noticing, the seeing, the being with, which is that tender side, and then the side of us that can take action. So I think we all kind of understand that what the tender side is. I think that's how we kind of think of self-compassion or compassion. But this fierce mama bear, fierce self-compassion side you'll see there, it protects, it provides, it can help motivate. There was a really neat study that Kristen Neff and some of her partners did around this. And as I said, some people worry that it will be demotivating, that they'll become self-indulgent and lazy. And it isn't that self-compassionate people are less motivated than other people. It's that when they fail, or it doesn't go well, or they make a mistake, they approach that differently with themselves, with self-compassion, and they are able to keep going in the face of that failure or imperfection. And you can see, I think this comes from, the yin yang symbol is there. And I love how Kristen describes it, which is, this comes from Chinese philosophy, but the core idea there being that they need to be in balance, and that each part is stronger with, it makes up the whole. Each part though is inside the other, and that's part of the strength of this image. And so if you're like me and a bit afraid that entering into self-compassion might be too soft or too gentle or too flimsy, this is for you. I wanted just to add one thing that I've mentioned on this fierce side. This might be with our kids, and it also might be with ourselves, obviously on the self-compassion side, but we can have compassion for our kids and still respond with some of these things you see on the fierce side. There's boundaries, there's saying no. There's provision for what we do need, yes. Inside the fierce self-compassion, we can, by mindful awareness, know if we are not living in integrity, if we're not living within our values, that there's also room for that. It's not all just the sort of that lovely acceptance tender over here. There's like, wow, I'm not actually living in integrity with how I want to show up. And fierce self-compassion can come alongside and say, okay, how does this need to change so that I can do this? For example, if you do this with other people already, and you do this with your kids, if a kid doesn't want to go to school, or doesn't like math and doesn't want to go to math, or doesn't want to do their homework, we can understand that, we can accept that, we can honor that. And then there are some other things that need to happen in order to move into the world in the way that you hope to and achieve your goals. So there's room when these two are in balance. Just want to highlight this, that I think when we think about fierce self-compassion, or my Nike poster, for example, I think what sometimes we're actually thinking about is self-criticism. So we have this idea that the self-criticism, that nagging voice in our head, or that kind of rude voice in our head, or a little bit my Nike poster. It's like, push through pain. There is no such thing. Keep going. Um, Really, there can be a real critical voice there. And the research on self-compassion shows that the self-compassion approach will actually sustain you for longer. Like I said, people who practice self-compassion don't give up. They're able to make the mistakes and keep going. Self-criticism, perfectionism, these can go together in a way that can actually demotivate us. So there's a lot more really interesting pieces on that, but I just wanted to highlight that. I think what we think motivates us is often self-criticism. And I think all of us probably know from personal experience, but also inside of the research, that that's not sustaining. How do we know we're in the world of self-criticism? I would say when you feel the labels, shoulds, highly critical, judgments, labels, overgeneralizing about ourselves, you're in the realm of self-criticism. And I love this image from Art Therapy Resources on Etsy of just this scale where self-compassion wins out. But paying attention to that in this next kind of practice, we're going to just talk about those 3 boxes: mindful awareness, common humanity, and self-kindness, just to break them down. And they can be one of the ways we begin to notice how we're relating to ourselves. Is it with compassion, or is it with self-criticism, or something else? Just want to demystify this. Mindful awareness feels like a meditating word, but it really is just these simple things. It's just becoming aware of the moment, of what's going on for you in this moment. So noticing what you're doing in the moment without judging it. So I think this is one of the keys, is that we do, back to how I said, when we're in self-criticism, judgment's high, labeling's high, shoulds. Really, we want to just be able to notice it and not judge it. So part of this mindful awareness is just noticing when we do judge it. One thing I wanted to add here, in mindful awareness, we're not trying to change anything. There is a myth out there that says in mindfulness, or even in meditation, I think that's why it doesn't work for a lot of people, that we're trying to like stop thinking, which is impossible. And so really, it's just about, as this Sharon Salzberg quote says, it's really just about noticing how we're relating to what's happening. Are we judging? Can we notice it with a little more gentleness or understanding, or that being with, like, oh God, yeah, I'm feeling really distressed right now, or this kid's driving me nuts? Or can we just notice that without putting a label on it, like I'm a bad parent, or I'm a bad friend, or any of those labels, judgments. Joseph Goldstein says mindful awareness is sitting and just knowing that you're sitting. So just being able to be aware in this moment of where you are and what's going on. I want to highlight this distinction for you real quick. Mindfulness, that mindful awareness, is paying attention to the experience. So, what's going on for me in this moment? And we're going to talk about that. You don't have to use just emotions to do that if that's not your thing. But self-compassion is actually paying attention to the experiencer of that experience. So us, ourselves, responding to ourselves as we have this experience. I really, for myself, appreciate this distinction. Common humanity is that second box. And I love that actually there's a typo in this visual that I borrowed from Psychology Mom, because this is common humanity. It's human to make mistakes or to have imperfections. So I've left it here. But really, this practice of common humanity, which sounds airy-fairy, is really just acknowledging that it's human to have a range of emotions when we're having, well, in this case, when we're experiencing grief and loss, that there are many waves that are unpredictable, and that you're coping the best you can, and that most other people, many other people, everyone else, however you think about that, would also be having a hard time with this. It's common, it's human, it's normal to feel unsure and to doubt myself, to lack my self-confidence after a loss. And you can see some of those other ones. It's okay it's human to need help. So these are some of the common humanity elements when I talked about number 2. We'll talk about that as we do a practice. Sophie, who has co-hosted with me quite a few of these lunch and learns, gave this quote, so I wanted to attribute it to her. When we struggle with situations that life throws at us, it's because it's hard, not because we're incompetent or we're doing it wrong. And sometimes our brain reaches toward that. If it's not working, there's something that we're messing up. And that's really not true. Another example is of common humanity would be if it's not that I don't know how to deal with the cards I've been dealt. Anyone who was dealt these cards would be having a hard time. That makes sense. Okay, I said self-compassion in translation. So let's just take out the kind of fancy words there, even though they're, hopefully by the end, they don't feel quite as fancy. But really, when we say mindful awareness, it's just this pausing, this noticing. And what I'd like to say is that it's really a switching off of autopilot. At the start, I said, you're not going to have to go and learn all these new skills or, go read a book or go take a workshop. And you're welcome to do that too, if you're really, interested in your curiosity is being piqued. But we are already having this ongoing conversation in our minds, and our bodies are already experiencing sensation all the time, as I said when we began reading cues from our environment. And so what we're doing with self-compassion is we are pausing and we get to shape the conversation that's happening in our heads there, and then the experience that's in our bodies. So we're switching off of autopilot, might even only be for 10 seconds, and we're pausing and we're noticing and we're not judging, we're just noticing. Number two, that common humanity is just to validate that this would be hard for anyone. And then that last one, respond to yourself with the same kindness that you would offer someone you love. Yeah, okay, we'll come back to this. I wanted to share a kind of a personal piece around this, but I'll do it at the end. So that was self-compassion in translation. If those other words don't work for you and they kind of clunk up the gears and make it hard to want to grab on and move into this practice. So in real life though, what can these look like? So I've given you suggestions here. They can look as personalized and, varied as we are as people, but these are some of the ways. And so when it came to the first one, to mindful awareness, as I was saying, it doesn't have to be like kind of a touchy-feely emotional thing even. It really can be some of these things. Beginning mindful awareness or doing mindful awareness might just be pausing for 3 breaths, pausing for a breath, pausing for 3 breaths, your hand on your chest. This is one for me. It just offers my body a cue of like, I'm paying attention for a minute. And sometimes it also feels soothing. But it might even just be like holding your hands in your lap and noticing that you're holding your hands. So some pressure, some touch. So touch, 3 breaths, a breath, that can help you kind of shift into a different space. Back at the beginning where I said self-compassion, mindful awareness have this ability to help our body shift into this other side of our nervous system. For me, sometimes I gave you an example, the noticing is just like, wow, that was kind of really mean way to talk to myself. I guess you could say that I labeled it when I said mean. So you don't have to do that. But I'm not labeling that I'm a bad person or that I'm a mean person. Just like, wow, that was like a really not nice way to talk to myself. So for me, sometimes it's just catching my thinking when I'm, like, oh my God, what an idiot. You did that again. It might be just that you notice your body. It might be like your shoulders are tight, or your head is aching, or your back hurts, or you're exhausted, or you're hyper, that you're kind of running on overdrive. Any of those things, just noticing those, just noticing. Those are mindful awareness practices. And then, as I said, you can acknowledge your experiences. That's just, again, without a label, just notice what's coming up for you. Like, I want to scream at this, this person. They are frustrating me. My kid's driving me nuts. You're not alone. We're going to move into that next, but you're not alone. Most parents feel this way sometimes, but just acknowledging what's going on. I'm tired. This kid's driving me crazy. I don't want to do this task. I don't want to go to these people's house. I'm just noticing that I don't want to go, so just paying attention, no judgment. And then we're going to respond in these ways. So that's us becoming aware, mindful awareness, and then responding. It might be, if what comes up is like, wow, this is really hard, or this is overwhelming. It's just validating that, like, as we said, like, yeah, it'd be hard for anyone. This is hard, not because you're doing it wrong. It might be just a reminder, but because this is hard. One that I often say to parents of, kids I'm supporting, teens I'm supporting, or them, if I'm supporting them, there is no manual for parenting And there's certainly no manual for parenting grieving kids. And so it is hard. And you're not alone. No parents have the manual. And as I already shared before, anyone else dealt these cards would be having a hard time too. Or as I said, this kid's driving me, bonkers, yeah, that's every parent feels this way at some point, that their kids are driving them crazy or their teenagers. They're afraid, that their teenagers going to make choices that are going to affect their life forever. Yeah, I'm not alone. That's what other teen parents think. Lastly, there, that self-kindness. I just want to, I love the little kind of graphic over there. Treat yourself as you would treat a good friend. But just to say, what do I need right now? I love this because um, this key question that kind of does move it into some action, which might need our fierce self-compassion, might not, might need tender, but what we're going to try to do is we're going to respond to that key question with action when we can. And if we can, we're also going to acknowledge that. And so it might look like soothing touch. It might look like just supportive words for ourselves, supportive words we would offer a friend. If these are hard to grab, you might want to think about a time someone else has been supportive. What was it about their support that felt good to you, that was soothing, that comforted you, that brought you into your window just a little bit? And begin to offer yourself that kind of response. And you can play with it, experiment. There's no wrong way to do this. Just want to talk specifically about grief and self-compassion here before we shift into kind of the end. Um, I want to talk about this unique piece of self-compassion and grief. One, before we begin, I want to say, I want to acknowledge, sometimes in these lunch and learns, I have a little hashtag real talk. And I want to do that for a second. I want to acknowledge that in grief, as I mentioned before, there can be a strong, not even just sense, but experience, true experience of feeling isolated, both for you and for your kids and your teens. So especially teens. That is a really valid, that experience is often happening. And it may not happen in those, it may be in the first days, but it may happen as time goes on and people are looking for that, oh, they're improving. And that may not be how it feels for you. It's not often how it goes in grief. It's more like waves, shifts, ebbs and flows. And so when you're trying to think about this common humanity, at times thinking about connecting to other grievers or other people based on your grief experience, which is going to be completely unique to you and the loss and your person, your relationship to the person who died, that can be harder to grab, I'm thinking about sibling loss, for example. A lot of people who've lost a sibling, it is challenging to feel like you relate to other people. You often don't know other people who had a loss like that. And even, a death in general, lots of kids and teens don't know someone else who's had that experience. And so it's very hard to practice common humanity. You might want to break it down into something a little bit more singular, like something that is connected to your experience. What's been hardest? Is it the single parenting? Is it not having a village, not having a partner? There are other people single parenting and they also find it hard and exhausting. Is it carrying the financial load of your family now? So identifying, like, with that awareness piece, what is hardest about this part of my grief and this part of my parenting? And then you could connect to common humanity, other people who are also having those kind of experiences, if that makes sense. So just want to highlight also that self-compassion can be a life jacket. We often talk about grief as these waves of grief, and sometimes there's waves you can predict, and sometimes there's sneaker waves, and sometimes you're on the shore, and sometimes you get swept out. But self-compassion can be this life jacket for when we get swept by a wave, or one comes, or even even just standing on the shore, and maybe we have more solid footing, but a wave comes in. But it can support us with intense and tricky feelings, as it can our children as well. I just listed some that are tricky, but you could put anything in this, fill this in, but I put guilt, shame, blame, loneliness, isolation that comes with grief. As I said, often what we're doing is we offer these out. Some of these feelings we don't offer out, feelings of guilt, blaming someone else. Maybe we don't want to add to their grief, but it's real for us, feelings of shame. So if we're not able to offer you that, you could see how self-compassion could be even more valuable. So there's that phrase that I've said in a few of these, but we can tend our what's going on, our experience, what is real. It's there. We don't have to pretend it isn't. We can tend it and befriend it, and that will take some of the kind of the steam out of it that moves us into our window, or back to that first bullseye graph, can shift our physiology to move us over into that side that brings us back into equilibrium. So we're offering ourselves that acknowledgement, that tending, that befriending. Um, I've already talked about this quite a bit, but it provides cues for safety and connection for our body, particularly when we're feeling isolated in grief. And I said this, it's one of my favorite things that by doing so, it allows us to show up in line with our values and commitment to our kids. And as we practice mindful awareness, it helps us clarify some of our vision and for our future. And I do want to clarify that it is normal in grief to not feel like you have access to the future. That's normal. So I'm not really talking about that. You don't have to be thinking down the road, what are my big goals? More like, what kind of, you know, parent do I want to be? Grief is an identity project. All those things are on the table, and we are often reconsidering many of those. But that fierce self-compassion can say, help us correct where maybe we're not showing up in the way that we have been committed to, want to live out, know is good for us, know is good for our family. But in grief and in the isolation and loneliness coming up and some of those intense feelings, it's harder. So self-compassion can support you to do that. Lastly, here, I wanted to highlight that it can help us deal with empathic pain. So that phrase around what it means to feel the pain of those we care for. And I know I don't need to tell you that that is a real part of parenting grieving kids. And so when that comes up for us, a practice of self-compassion, of course, we're feeling their pain. Of course, we are, you know, feeling a lot of what they're feeling, that we're sharing a nervous system at times, and it can be dysregulating. So this is us moving back into our window so that we can share our window with our kids when they're struggling. Couple things here to ask, what do I need right now? That is a self-compassion practice. So I said at the beginning, you don't have to find all these new tools. You don't have to spend a ton of time, just by noticing, what is it that I need right now? That is entering a self-compassion practice. Just a heads up here before we come to a close, it's a very short 5-minute practice for us to try out, but a couple heads ups. Don't bypass pain with self-compassion. So don't try to use self-compassion as a way to not feel the pain, the intensity that comes with grief. It won't work, first of all. But I love this phrase here. We do it because we're hurting, to tend to that, to offer ourselves care, not so that we won't feel pain. The other thing is modeling is the best teacher. So just a little caveat I want to say. I would encourage you, if you're anything like me, I come away from learning something like this and I want to offer it to my family right away. Like, oh my God, I learned this amazing thing. We should all start practicing self-compassion. So I want to just highlight, would encourage you just to start living into this, just trying it out, modeling it out loud at times, maybe you might talk through the process that you're having. Like I shared when I might say, oh my God, that was a mean way to talk to myself. You could offer that. Oh, wow, I didn't, that was mean, oh, I'm an idiot, or that was stupid. Why did I do that? Oh, you pause, you notice, you might say that out loud, just like we do with kids when babies are learning language. We say, oh, that's a light, or, that's a dog, or whatever. We do that with our emotions as well. And now we're talking about even moving that into the realm of self-compassion. You can do that out loud. Another thing that I've done is when I would hear my kids say something like, oh, I'm so stupid, I would say, hey, don't talk about my son like that. Don't talk about my daughter like that. And it became this kind of little joke, this funny thing between us, but it was also very real, and I was challenging that self-criticism, that voice, and hopefully offering a gentler, compassionate one that they can integrate. So I encourage you just to begin practicing, and certainly don't use it like, hey, I saw that in grief, it's so important for us to practice self-compassion. You're really critical of yourself. I think that you could benefit from that. Just hold it, take what fits for you, begin to bring it into your own life, and they'll notice. Lastly, I want to address the idea of backdraft. This is a term that Kristen Neff and her colleague Chris Germer have used to talk about what it's like when those intense emotions that we begin to pay attention to, that we have mindful awareness of, when those can bring up, as we pay attention to them with kindness, what might happen is we might have other feelings like them, that memories, feelings of a time in the past when we were hurting and we didn't get what we needed. So it says there that maybe those are times where we weren't actually cared for, responded to, loved, or accepted in the past. This doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. You're not doing self-compassion wrong. It's normal. And would encourage you to, there's a great article, let me see if I have that there, compassionwithin.com. And they have a backdraft article that walks you through how to manage backdraft if it comes up. But just very simply, it really is returning to a self-compassion practice. It says, mindful awareness. Ooh, that's heated. That's intense. That's like more fiery than I was anticipating. Oh yeah, that's backdraft. That's normal. It's human too. It's normal. This is a normal experience when I start paying attention to this. One thing to say is what we know is that an emotion, when allowed to move through our bodies, will last 90 seconds. So sometimes for me, it's like, okay, 90 seconds. And then our that sensation that we're having, it will lessen like a wave, move through. And then we will also have a little bit more access to kind of that frontal part of our brain that can help us think about it and problem solve it. If that's not happening, if the wave's not lessening and the intensity is continuing to grow, then you will want to shift your attention, shift your attention out to just an ordinary experience that you enjoy. Might be going for a walk, it might be grabbing a glass of water or a cup of tea or calling a friend or just moving in some way that you enjoy. Turning that internal attention just external. And it's almost like purposefully moving from internal to external and disconnecting from that intensity for a bit. And that's okay. Because what we're doing is we're sort of building our capacity in our window. We're coming in and out, in and out. And so sometimes those emotions will take you outside the window. You don't want them to take you too far out. So that's why we do a practice of self-compassion and mindful awareness around the backdraft. And then we shift back into our window by doing something that helps us ground and feel centered. You don't have to like keep staying with that. So there's some really great resources out there, but just want you to be aware of that. You're not doing anything wrong when that happens. As we come to an end, I want to give you a chance to put this all together in trying it out. So we learn about things, by talking about them, and then we also get to try them out and see what that experience is like for us. And so this is, as I mentioned before, a 5-minute just practice led by Kristen Neff. These are on our website. I'll give you the link to these in a moment. But just settle back into the space that you're in, watching. If you're walking, maybe don't close your eyes, but do what feels comfortable, settle in, and allow Kristen to lead you. At times, I have found for myself that it's a little too much work and energy required to sit with a self-compassion practice that I am actually kind of leading. And so I appreciate being able to lean on one that's already there to guide me. So this is an opportunity to try that out.
This is a version of the self-compassion break designed to bring in some tenderness, some loving, connected presence when you're hurting or struggling in some way. So please think of a situation in your life where you are in some need of some care. Maybe you're feeling inadequate in some way, feeling badly about a failure or a mistake you made, or something about yourself you don't like. Or maybe something's very difficult in your life, stressful, challenging. So allow yourself to feel your way into the situation. What's going on? What are you feeling? And also feeling the distress in your body if you can, right? So dropping out of your head into your body, feeling the discomfort. And now we're going to bring in the three components of self-compassion, starting with mindfulness. So mindfulness, when it comes to tender acceptance, is really just about being present with what is. Right? Being present and validating the pain. So saying to yourself something like, this is really hard to feel this or to experience this. Right? This moment is painful. It's a moment of suffering. And also reminding yourself of your humanity, right? Feelings like this, situations like this. This is part of being human. There's nothing wrong with me for feeling this way. And I'm certainly not the only one. So allowing yourself to feel your connectedness to others in your own imperfection. And then finally, we want to bring in some kindness. So one way to do that is with physical touch. So putting your hands on your heart, perhaps, or cradling your face with your hands, feeling the warmth of your hands. And saying something kind to yourself, which is exactly what you need to hear in this moment. Maybe it's a message of acceptance. It's okay to be imperfect. Or a message of support. You know, I'm here for you. It'll be okay. And if you aren't sure what to say, you might imagine what you would say to a dear friend in a very similar situation. What words of care and comforting would you use to help your friend? And then try saying something similar to yourself. And now letting the practice go. Just allowing yourself to be exactly as you are in this moment. And if you're feeling any distress, you can always try grounding your feet in the floor, feeling the soles of your feet, feeling that stability.
So that's it. That is a short 5-minute self-compassion break. Just to try it. And there's different kinds. One thing I would encourage you to do is to find someone, if there's something about Kristen's voice that doesn't resonate for your body, choose someone who does. That's one of the pieces that I know that I myself gravitate toward. There's some wonderful teachers out there who lead really neat practices, but there's something about their voice that doesn't bring me into the same kind of place. And that I think that's important too. So that's just an example. I put this self-compassion break here because these are the components we've been talking about, 1, 2, 3. But Kristen Neff talks about if you're even in the middle of an argument with someone, it might be that you call, for a self-compassion break. There's that awareness of like, I am overwhelmed, I'm flooded, I'm outside my window. I need a break, and to go and just offer this short practice. And I hope one thing that you're noticing, that was a 5-minute one, but it can happen in just a few seconds. So let's just talk about that for a moment as we close up, which is, I titled this one, okay, I'm curious about this, but what's realistic? And just wanted to take those three components of self-compassion, the mindful awareness, common humanity, and self-kindness, and just acknowledge that they can be a bit of a roundabout. Mindful and awareness is the first step because we do have to become aware that something's going on, that we're feeling something, that something feels off, or that just a sensation in our bodies. Does have to be some noticing, that pausing, that noticing to begin reshaping our relationship with our mind, with those self-critical thoughts, and with our in our physiology. Like we talked about at the beginning. However, each of us will find one or more of these areas to be maybe harder than another. And so I would encourage you to kind of notice what that is for you and enter this roundabout, if you will, wherever works. So I shared with you at some point during this conversation that the self-kindness part, it's harder for me. It's really gentle, it's really soft and kind. And it's I trust it least. That's kind of my own stuff, and that's part of my own experience. And so to enter there, I would probably have a much harder time. But to go in with mindful awareness, that's a good entry point for me. I'm comfortable doing that. And perhaps you're in a different zone. It's more comfortable for you to offer yourself the kindness first and then kind of move into paying attention and validating your experience and then responding again. So as I said, just to ask, what do I need right now? That is the beginning of a self-compassion practice, that is entering self-compassion. And that really kind of fits into number 3 here, the responding with kindness. What is it that I need right now? So sometimes I'm able to enter that way. And for some of us, saying, well, of course this is hard. What's going on is hard. It's human too. That common humanity, that might be your entry point. We're all different. You can find your entry point on this sort of roundabout to get you started. Another thing to think about just before we're done here is finding ways to incorporate a pause into the things that you already do without making it something to add to your to-do list. So maybe you walk the dog every day, and that's a place where you just plan. There's like a signal to your brain to pause, notice what's around you, notice what's going on in your body as you walk, in your head. Maybe it's while you are kind of putting your moisturizer on at the end of the day. Maybe it's while you're making dinner. Maybe it's while you're going for a jog. I don't know. Whatever is something that you already do. For myself, I had a mentor once encourage me to create the pause when I got in the car, because it's something that most of us, pre-COVID anyway, we're doing at least once a day, most of us. And so for me to get in and pause instead of just rushing from A to B and never pausing and never transitioning, it was a really good practice for me because I can just get in and go. But as I would put on my seatbelt, I would just do a breath, hopefully 3 breaths if I really had time and space and was paying attention enough. But it might even just be a breath to come into this next moment and to pay attention. Yeah, I'm feeling rushed, or I'm feeling tired, or it's not necessarily even the responding. It might just be mindful awareness for that moment. The other thing that I wanted to share with you that's been valuable, and I think is something to remember when we enter new practices or we try to build on a practice we're already using, is this idea of just noticeable change. So this is another kind of a piece a mentor gave me. Most of us want to make these big changes and want them to be sweeping and effective and sustainable, but just noticeable change really is how we can get to a different destination. That idea that if we're on a path, but we just move just a degree off of where we are walking, in the end, we will end up in a completely different destination. And I think that really applies to this session on self-compassion. You don't have to overhaul anything. You can just begin to have a practice that's incorporating some of these things, a pause and notice, whether it's for 10 seconds or 5 minutes, whether it's something you're doing on your own or you use other practices that are external, where, like, if you're like me, sometimes it's helpful to have someone lead them. So just beginning and aiming for small changes. And I hope that this session, the practice, this conversation, and feel free to watch it again on the website, has been nourishing and maybe piqued your curiosity a little bit about how to bring self-compassion into your grief. These are some resources. You may want to screenshot this. Just at the top there, Dr. Kristen Neff, that's her website. She has so many great free resources. So I think she has, I don't know, 10 or 12 meditations there on her website, one of which is for fierce compassion. So if that's something you're interested in, she has, I think it's like a 10-minute meditation or practice there. And I believe that she also has one for backdraft. If you remember, I was talking about just beware that when we begin to enter a practice like this, big feelings may come up and you're not doing anything wrong, but you want to support that. So she has a great practice for backdraft if you're noticing that coming up for you. And then her colleague in her work is Dr. Chris Germer. So I put his website up there as well. He also has a list of some meditations there just to kind of guide us through as we're learning to kind of move this practice inside of us, more natural to us, integrate it into our way of thinking and being. And then lastly, I mean, there's a lot of great resources out there, pardon me, but I just chose these three to highlight for you. Dr. Susan Pollock, I referred to her a couple of times in our session. And if you'll see there down on the right, she has a book actually entitled Self-Compassion for Parents, Nurture Your Child by Caring for Yourself. And back to this modeling, letting our kids see us take care of ourselves in this way is very powerful. And as I mentioned at the very start, we know that self-care, AKA self-compassion, has a very important part in that, taking care of ourselves, is a cornerstone, is a foundation piece for resilient parenting as you support and care for your grieving kids.